Hi, Lou here, and we are at the part 2 of techniques tabletop war games can sometimes adopt from Euros and some that we shouldn't. These were the techniques we should adopt, most of which were discussed in part 1, and so this part will be mainly about ones we shouldn't adopt. The last one to adopt is fantasy and science fiction. Many younger people take to fantasy and science fiction. History, on the other hand, is too ugly for them, or they just know next to nothing about history. They don't see the stories in history as easily as they see the stories in fantasy and science fiction. Yet, historical gamers sometimes turn their noses up at fantasy and science fiction. Even though historical games aren't very historical, actually, at least not to this historian. From a designer's point of view, you can focus on making a good game with fantasy and science fiction. You don't have to worry about the history. Now we have 5 techniques we should not adopt. And again, I'll go through each one individually. The first is the lack of player interaction. Many non-war games have so little player interaction, that is, the players hindering and helping other players, that they are effectively puzzles, multiplayer solitaire. My official name for these is parallel competitions. I used to call them contests. The heart of games, as opposed to puzzles, is player interaction. And certainly, player interaction is the heart of war games. There are so-called war games without much interaction, and they instead are resource management games, or sometimes something else. Puzzle orientation is something we generally don't want in war games. History is not inevitable. It's a conjunction of great trends plus many chance occurrences and unlikelihoods. What actually happens is often less likely rather than more likely to happen. Puzzles, on the other hand, force a particular outcome, which is the solution to the puzzle. They are only good for teaching specific events, not for understanding what might have happened. In effect, they are training rather than education. Educating in history requires games, not puzzles, so that a lot of different things are possible. If you only want someone to know what happened, puzzles are okay. Multiple paths to victory. This is an often touted virtue of Eurostyle games, and it puzzled me when I first encountered it, which is quite a few years ago now. After all, don't all good games have multiple ways to succeed? I had misunderstood. They meant there were several solutions to the puzzle rather than just one. So they were talking about parallel competitions with only a small number of solutions. This is generally not what we want in opposed games. Handholding. This is common in video games. The wisdom is always let the player know what they need to do next, and sometimes let them know how to do it. This was especially obvious in the early Facebook games popularized by Zynga. Don't make the player decide, just let them experience whatever happens. I don't think we want this in war games, but it may be showing up in solo-only games quite a bit. Rubber band mechanisms. Catch-up mechanisms are necessary in puzzle games, otherwise, whoever gets ahead in solving the puzzle usually wins. These must be designed in because other players cannot affect what's happening. After all, they don't interact with one another, or not much. So there are a variety of mechanisms for quick comebacks. War games, being highly interactive, do not require any such thing. It's up to the player to pull back a leader, or the players. So that's the end of my list. No doubt we could think of more, but it's a good list to think about. Thanks for listening.